Welcome, I'm the Deadwoodjedi. This is going to be a DragonHeir video. I haven't touched this game in a little bit here, but I wanted to revisit it because I had a lot of fun playing it, and I thought some of you might as well, and I thought it'd be a fun kind of, step back in, take a gander at how Season 2 is going in DragonHeir and talk a little bit about combat and the way that it works. And I'm very happy because I have a good friend of mine on with me here, and that's going to be Dragon Grind, who's been grinding the game. He's been a long time player in Raid as well with me, but he's playing DragonHeir a lot right now. And so he's got a YouTube channel. You can check it out. I'll have that link down below in the pinned comment description of the video. So make sure, go check that out. Support my boy here. But hey, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, man. How you been?
I'm all right. Thanks for coming on. I just want to kind of dive in really quickly here. I know Season 1, I had a lot of fun playing that. I kind of got started into Season 2. You've been grinding it pretty deeply here. There's a lot of change that happened from Season 1 to Season 2. I thought maybe you could, touch on a couple of those for us as far as like what that means as far as the gameplay goes.
Yeah, you know what? Coming from Raid, and I did play for 4 years, was in the game for a long time. One of the big things that everyone was skeptical about was the season changes.
Yeah,
and including myself, I'm kind of a half glass empty kind of individual. So hearing about it, I was kind of, man, I'm gonna try it out because it's new.
This is how we balance each other out. You're glass half empty, I'm glass half full, and usually we come to a nice synergy.
A nice middle ground, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, I was excited because I knew that they would pretty much have to stand by their word of changing things. It wouldn't be the same old game every season, and they was not wrong. They took away some gear sets that I like. They changed up some bosses, added new bosses to certain in-game areas, which is really nice because you never want the in-game to get stale. After Season 2 launched and I started, really getting into it, I realized that a lot of these changes were for the good. The gear sets were interesting. They took some of my favorites out. The new boss, he's different because the old one relied heavily on, you need to make sure you bring this mechanic, that mechanic, such like this. This one's more about if you can build a tough team. And it is. On top of that, they stayed true to some of their previous content, the continental bosses or the global bosses that happened during the event. But they changed the bosses around, so the general mechanics are different. So there's been a lot of changes from Season 1 to Season 2, but it's not so much that it feels like a different game. It's just that you have to learn some new tricks.
I like that. I like that a lot. I've been playing, the same game for 4 or 5 years now, and it does get a little stale after a time. Having that change kind of built in, that's pretty exciting. That sounds like it, keeps the game fresh as you're playing it along. Now, you did mention that there's new bosses. I think we definitely want to kind of check those out. You also mentioned that there's new gear sets, and I remember when I was playing, the gear sets had a huge impact on the success of my teams. Maybe you can talk a little bit about like how important those are, and not only for the combat itself, but also like, what the changes have been, and like, the significant changes, I guess, in the game right now.
As far as the gear sets go, a lot of what they have changed is more about the synergy rather than utility. Like in Season 1, I was afraid that they was going to take away the stun set. It's one of the most, utility driven sets in the game. And they didn't really take away the utility, but what they did was they tried to lean a little more heavily into other mechanics, damage mechanics or speed teams and things like that. So if you was someone that just, brought in your biggest brawlers and threw, a few damage oriented sets in Season 1, in Season 2, it allowed you to focus more in on certain mechanics such as derivative damage or, more debuff driven champions, stuff like that, which is really cool. Speaking about the continental bosses, they did bring 6 new bosses on this season, and I really do enjoy them. Let me see if I can't pull one up here for us. Here we'll go to the one where I'm doing the best. It's
Always
You
a good
know,
idea to show off the best. I think that's a good
right.
call.
You got it when you can flex. You got to flex hard. But yeah. Oh, and then of course they got they got the horse. Yeah, I'm really happy about that. Now his movement speed seems to be on par with
running around.
But he still looks cool. Okay, you got a Cadillac. You drive it slow. But going in here, the bosses, bunch of different ones, which includes more strategy, which means you're going to need to come up with different concepts for tackling these bosses. Right. And a lot of the gear sets that they've done kind of focus in on that. They kept some of the golden ones, like the one that works off of attack speed. In this game, it's not turn based. A lot of it's about timing and the horrible maths that some of us love. I'll say. And so they kept some of the necessary ones, if you would, but then some of the sets are more balanced into certain niche types of champions.
Start hitting that synergy you're talking about, right?
Yes, like derivative damage is a huge one. This relies heavily on people who. In this game, it's a little weird. So we have the traditional crit rate, crit damage, system of increasing your damage, but there's also derivative damage, which uses enlightenment. Which is normally considered a utility stat to help with healers, increasing their heals and stuff like that.
Right.
But this does it more for damage. So there's certain sets that do that. There's also one that this one's kind of interesting in itself. So, diminishing returns on attack and defense and such like that. Well, this one actually kind of takes that out of it a little bit. It states when the wearer deals damage to an enemy with lower attack, the current damage will be increased based on the difference value of the attack.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of there's some champions that like their shields or whatever effect is based on how much attack they have. Vinyar is one of my favorites. Skeleton Lady, she is a gem. Love her. But I do. She is so clutch. She bases her shields that she gives people off of attack. So you increase their attack and just build and just stack attack. Well, this set will also allow her to do an additional 200% damage. So, here's one that's actually a bit a little confrontational. So last season, when an enemy would set off when one of your champions would set off their ultimate ability, they would give their team a 15% attack buff. This is like really the most common and probably one of the most non-champion specific ways to get an increased attack buff in this game.
Makes sense.
The way they do some of the mechanics is a little different. Well, in season 1, you launched off your ultimate, and it would take effect on the team. 10 seconds later, someone else with the set on would have to launch their ultimate to keep it up, 100% uptime.
But that makes sense. You have 2 support champions, each of them using their ultimates for other things, but it's making your damage dealers do more damage. So that would work really nicely.
It brings more utility to those types of champions. Exactly.
This one does it on debuffs.
Yes. Whenever the wearer successfully inflicts a debuff, they give the team the attack thing. Now that's kind of weird because then it's like, oh, well, those certain utility champions that you was just talking about, heals or shields or whatever, or that you would, time up with their ultimate. Now you don't really have, that doesn't really give them the ability, but what this actually allowed to do, and here's something for any of the DWJ fans that do play DragonHeir, and if you haven't, you should drop, hit that link down below.
I'm sure there's a few out there. I'm sure there's a few.
Well, look, I found it. There are some debuff champions like specifically poison type champions that will put out a poison mist that will do damage every second for 8 seconds or something like that. Yes. That means every second it's refreshing up. So one champion can literally carry this, while last season it required 2.
That's very cool.
Yeah, but it's the same mechanic, but then they changed it enough to where now we have to learn the new tricks to using it.
Right. But I mean, that for me was always the fun. It's the puzzle solving aspects of these games that I always really enjoyed. And I like the fact that they change them every season. So you have to you don't have to learn everything new, but you do have to kind of find some new synergies within that to really optimize your team. And I think that's important. So it sounds like the gear sets are going to be pretty crucial to building a good, strong, damage dealing kind of team, getting the right sets on the right champions.
Yes. And actually, that'll probably be a good time to transition to an actual team for a continental boss, where I can show a little bit about, the synergy it takes in here. So we have Garius. He's a tank. His business is all about taking the damage and surviving as the front line.
Right.
But I also put a set on him where it takes 15, the ally protection. I'm sure you remember that from season 1. This is one of the ones that they actually kept. 15% he takes 15% of the damage, such, just like ally protection, and gets a 15% damage reduction. So I was able to take my tank, who can soak up most of the hits, no problem. Usually it's the rest of the team that dies first, but I give him that ally protection. And Garrus is broken. He don't need nothing else to his kit to do what he does. He don't. He's a healer. He's got a little bit of control in his kit, and he stays alive. That boy does it all. But I'm able to give him even more utility by utilizing these sets. A new set, and okay, I'll square up with you. I have the most S tier broken champion in season 2 on my account. like all the other CCs out there, they put Beldel at S tier with only like 1 or 2 other champions that are considered S tier. But I have her, and this is one of the new sets. I actually took one of the sets that I love that ignore defense, similar to like a Savage set from Raid, and they changed it. Every time the wearer casts a battle skill or an ultimate skill, so either one of their main skills, they receive an 8% damage bonus for 15 seconds, 4 times. So easy maths, 32%. The duration of each stack is calculated independently. So you're kind of like, man, these battle skills, they're based on 5-10 seconds, and that only lasts the 8 seconds, I believe, right?
Yeah, but you're starting to stack those up over time, so you're getting at least 8% damage bonus, if not 16% or 24%, depending on how many of those skills are going kind of at the same time, right?
Correct. Well, on top of that, if this set came out in season 1, there might be some shade thrown at it. But in season 2, they dropped new champions that called Ice Blast champions. Their skills are built around having ice crystals on them, which is kind of like a little protected buff. But they use these ice crystals like currency to have the ability to repeat their battle skill over and over and over again. This is a set specifically, well, not really specifically. I use it on other champions, but it's a set that.
But it starts to really shine with these Ice Blast champions.
Yes, they do. Insanely slow. On this boss itself, last week, I got 3 times the top reward damage. I'll just put it out there like that. 3 times. And that ain't like, I'm not like blowing out no world records, but for someone who doesn't wail out, is a really nice damage. And it was based off of building this synergy between the sets, between the champions. These 2 back here are both Ice Blast champions, and they're literally here just to enable Beldel to do her thing. And I must say, this is how broken she is. She had 86% of the damage.
Well, why don't you show her in action? We can talk a little bit about how those synergies work, especially with these new champions. I mean, I know we've got this. I know Ice Blast came out. There's a fire, like a fire burn champion as well.
Yes.
Burns. And there's a lightning one too. Do they all have like specific places that you use them in the game, or are they all going to be good kind of generally everywhere? Depends on the set. Depends on the group.
I mean, okay, here's how it goes. Okay, so the Ice Blast is pretty exclusively single target. But I use that team on like 7 or 8 of the dungeons that I run. I have her exclusive, Beldel's exclusive artifact. I've got the synergy built out. So I can, even though at the beginning of this, at the beginning of the season, I was like, I'm building these elements, affinities for these dungeon bosses, because I know I'm very familiar with champions in there and what's mechanically available. Keep in mind, the game's, it's still fairly fresh, so they're ever developing new things to throw in here, which kind of just makes it more of a challenge for those who really like the theory craft. So I had these whole grand plans built out, and I was like, I'm gonna use this team for that and that. And then I get Beldel, and I just get into the hook, and I'm like, you know what? She can do it all. Just put her in there with some people.
Hey, look, man, you got LeBron on your team. You just run on his back. I get it. Yeah. Why change it? Well, that seems pretty good. I mean, I'm watching the damage numbers just pop up, and it looks insane. And you can see all the times it pauses to like show a different skill being used. Obviously, that Ice Blast, the fact that they're being able to use their skills over and over and over again is obviously very, very effective here.
It was definitely a new tactic. I was intrigued to see it.
I mean, I think that's the interesting thing about this game that I found was like when it came to combat, there was a lot of tactics to be used that I would have completely different results based off of the gear, like we talked about, based off the champions. You know, there's 6 different elements, and having the synergy between them, which changes each season, was really, really important to being strong. But also, I thought it was really interesting the placement on the battle mat itself, right? That depending where you put your champions, it could completely change the result of your run and how fast and effective you are at doing it.
Actually, I would say that in a lot of the videos that I see, you know, of the other content creators that are tackling DragonHeir right now, that is probably one of the most important, and they will admit this, but the least spoken about is the placement. Some of these, like there is one of these global bosses that her basic attack will bounce between enemies. It's single target, but it will bounce as long as they're within 2 squares of each other. Oh. So in that particular battle, I put out 2 tanks up the front, and I make sure that there's appropriate spacing for the placement of the rest of my champions, and it really diminishes the effect that her basic, and she gets like damage buffs and everything because she's a boss. It really affects that. So if someone wasn't using the proper placement, they could only be getting, you know, half of the maximum reward damage. And if they just have the proper placement, it really changes the game.
So then I guess my question would be then, out of those 3 things, right? When it comes to champions, when it comes to champions, gear, placement, would you say placement's the most important factor of it, or would you say it still comes down to the champions and the gear? Like, what would you say would be number 1 as far as building a team?
To be fair, in every game of like this that I've ever played, from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius to Raid to some of the in-betweens to what is now DragonHeir as my main, it's always gear. Okay, I've done many takeovers throughout my Raid career, and they'll have the champions, they'll have the resources, but they don't have the gear and time to put in. That being said, this game took it a completely different direction. It brought in to where, like you named off the 3, it is now a trinity. If you don't have the right champion with the right mechanics, it doesn't matter how good your gear is. It doesn't matter how good your placement is, because you're missing these key essential functions.
So can you, like, what would be the most valuable things as far as like skills that you do want to bring into your team? Or is it more roles that you're like, do you need a healer and a tank and a DPS? Or is it like, I need to make sure I get my defense break and my attack break and, like my, little damage over time things? Or does that generally change boss to boss?
No, I would say that there are, your number 1 most important is a tank. As soon as your front line breaks down, the rest of your team is just gone. Yeah. That's just point blank period on that. Following behind that, decreased attack is so decreased attack and decreased defense have always been mainstays and staples. Well, in this game, they gave us decreased attack on champions, but you get your decreased defense from an artifact, which is part of their dupe system.
Okay. Oh, right. I remember that. Yeah, that was really important. Just real quick, I hate to interrupt. The top reward was 2.2 million.
Yeah, 22
and you just
million.
did 68 million. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, and honestly, that's a little low. I probably need to update some things,
low.
But yeah, a little low. Yes.
Get good. I mean, what are you doing out here? Putting up these scrub numbers. 68 million.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the first time that I pulled it in, I expected good results. I was like, man, because to be honest, I would like to present myself a little bit as a theory crafter, someone who's accomplished in being able to make a hard roster work.
Success. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is a hard roster, but you definitely put together a pretty darn good team there. Dude, that's great.
Yeah. I'm very proud of this one for sure. For sure.
That's awesome. Well, okay. Well, I mean, I think that kind of gives us kind of a nice little overview of like what season 2 is about, and not only that, but how to go about building a quality team for these different areas of the games. I like these chief challenges. These seem very fun and cool. I know
it's so great, and they actually rely heavily on the affinity. This boss in particular, as you may or may not have noticed, most of my team was Frost, because this boss takes 100% more cold damage.
Right.
So it's not just about having the good champions, but the right good champions in the right affinities and built with proper synergy.
See, this is what I kind of like about one of the things I really enjoyed about the game was it felt like there was good long-term potential to playing it, in the sense that, you know, you want more. I mean, all these games are kind of similar. You want more and more champions, but I find a lot of them they get replaced and outdated, and you kind of don't touch them again. But with this, it seems like there's a chance to kind of constantly want to be using them again and again, and finding different champions to kind of bring in. You're not always just relying on your same top 5 champions, because a lot of that has to do with that elemental affinity. It's just kind of built into it, which I really like.
Yes, it's actually huge. So Goblin is where you get your XP to level your champions in this game.
Right.
Last season, I used a free-to-play variation with, you know, maybe a few upgraded champions of the number 1 most common Goblin team. I used a Sigrid. In season 2, I still have the exact same team, and it will still very much work. But I decided to go with a Frost-based team using my man, the Dork, and the Wizard Vladimir, who both of these champions seem to be not getting the light that they deserve in their respective elements. So instead of building what I knew already worked, I built something else that I knew would work. And you know, and it wasn't a struggle. It wasn't like, oh man, I know, you know, exactly what to do on this one. I was just able to take the team that I wanted, that being key, champions that I wanted to use, even if they weren't like, oh, well, everyone else does this in 40 something seconds. Yeah. I'm at 49 seconds right now. Okay. And I use completely different champions. You know what I mean? 49-second dungeon run. I'm good with that. And it works. And it's so much. That team that I just showed you, even with the OP, you know, strong Beldell, the other 5 continental champion or continental bosses, even if I could, I probably wouldn't run her in those, just because of the fact that the affinity damage multiplier.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Getting the right elements is a huge issue when you're trying to build a proper team. Like, you just gotta find the right combination. Yes. Well, I mean, look, I think this is really, this is awesome. Being able to see this, being able to see like an advanced account actually do really good work. You know, one of the great things I enjoyed about this game too, which really hits that theory crafter part, is it doesn't cost you anything to move anything around. Doesn't cost you anything to abort a run, right? And you only spend resources when you finish a run or you're upgrading your gear. Like, once it's there, you can swap it as much as you want, and actually save sets. You can use the same sets on different champions depending on what area you're in, which I think is always really good for that sort of thing. PG, thank you so much for coming on and talking us through this. It's a fun game. I wish I had more time to play it, honestly. But every time I see it, every time I talk about it, I get that little inkling. I'm like, oh, I need to jump back in this thing. I need to get back in there, because it's a blast to play and a lot of fun as a theory crafter specifically.
It is, and it's still a bit in its infancy. So, you know, there's still plenty of time for you to come around, and, you know, don't worry, DG will be there to help you when you do. You know, I'll be here. I'll hold down the fort until you get here, because we will need a speed tune calculator for this game. Okay, it's all about seconds and timings. Okay, we gonna need that.
All right. Well, hey guys, look, if you need some help in the meantime before I start doing any content on this, make sure to check out Dragon Grind. I'm gonna have his content stuff linked down below in the pinned comment description of this video. If you're interested in the game, I'll have a link for that down below as well. You can download that there. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, a part of this. And guys, till next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.